we are again for another edition of the Brotherhood Remnant podcast. And I
Hello,
have with
Tim.
me, as I always do, the illustrious
Oh.
Rob Carr, who knows more about Brotherhood history than you care to know.
That's probably the case. And my co-host, which I enjoy working with, is Mr. Tim Yarborough, who has a great interest in this, and he listens to me very intently. So thank you, Tim.
Well, tonight we're going to talk about more Brotherhood history. And one of these days, we're going to get past
Yes.
all this history for those folks who really don't care that much about history. We're going to get into some juicy details about the more recent aspects of Brotherhood. But tonight we're going to basically roll up to about 1997, I believe. Is that right, Rob?
Well, we're going to be close enough to that, but we'll get there. It's probably closer to 1950, but it's okay. We can jump over to other things and come back to that.
So tonight, our podcast, we're going to name it The Movement Faces Challenges.
Right.
And Rob, I'm real interested to hear what you got to say on this topic. I know you've been working diligently to do some research. And before we get started, let's just remind everybody that our Brotherhood Remnant email is brotherhoodcommission@gmail.com. And I'm going to put that up on the screen.
Yes.
All right. See
there
it?
We go. Now we're there.
All right. So once again, our email for the Brotherhood Remnant podcast is brotherhoodcommission@gmail.com. And we have begun to build a repository of files that you might be interested in or be interested in sharing with your friends. And you can see that on the screen there. It's https://tinyurl.com/BHD for Brotherhood files. And finally, we have a blog, believe it or not. And you can see the email address there. It's brotherhoodremnant.blogspot.com. So take it away, Rob, and I'll put this on the full screen here, and you begin our podcast tonight.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you for all that have been watching and participating in this. We appreciate and we do anticipate your comments, your thoughts, your ideas, and any subject matter that you might feel would be worth looking into and discussing. One of the things that I would say very quickly is some of the groups of men who are reforming brotherhoods or men's ministry are looking to find things like this to be part of their discussion or part of their learning process. So we don't know where all these podcasts are going, but an area that a friend of mine has told me about that he'd like to take this to a men's breakfast sometime and display it and share it. So that's a good thing. And you find any way to use it, let us know, and we'll be happy to share that with
Well, that would be cool. That would really be cool.
Yeah, it really would. Well, again, I'm showing you some things I showed in the third podcast, but from 1907 to 1997, and I won't spend a lot of time here, but you basically had three titles of Brotherhood, which became the Brotherhood Commission that Tim and I knew, but the Layman's Missionary Movement and the Baptist Brotherhood of the South. I'll just leave it at that. But those are some things there that some areas to cover whenever we're getting back into the history part. The other thing I want to remind me is that this information is coming from a historical support, the idea of a dissertation that Archie Brown did in 1950 called The History of the Baptist Brotherhood of the South. And we're eventually going to have someone like Jack Childs, hopefully will come and talk about from his time in the early 60s till the end of Brotherhood, which he can give a perspective there too. I'm not here just to regurgitate some historical facts, because you're right. You can read this dissertation, and it is on our remnant resource area that Tim talked about. So the title is The Movement Faces Challenges. And this is where I want to begin very quickly, because the core purpose of the Baptist Layman's Missionary Movement, not long after it was formed, came up against some what I would call some challenges. And they were trying to meet a specific need in this. So from 1907 to 1950, I'm just going to give you some how things began to evolve very quickly. There's not going to be a lot here, but you're going to see why I'm doing this, because it's going to catch up with us later on. So the core value of the Brotherhood, or the Layman's Missionary Movement in 1907, was to do two things: to enlist the interest of laymen in missions and to raise support of those laymen in missions. Okay, now let me just kind of go through these things and don't move the slide yet. So anyway, in 1908, there was some additions to the purpose and plan of the layman's missionary movement to, number one, to evangelize the world, to draw men to missions overseas. There was a challenge to do that. And then to scatter information of the needs and work overseas across the local layman's groups that were in the churches. Okay. And then to make available an adequate supply of funds through the existing organization. That's something that you have to listen to, through the existing organizations. So men were saying, we have the church organization. We will put all of our money, our resources through that church in order for it to meet the missionary needs. In 1909, there was a reminder that the layman's missionary movement was not to be administrative, but was to educate and inspire, and to bring laymen to the obligation of the kingdom, of understanding it and do the responsibility of kingdom work. 1911, to teach stewardship and draw men toward weekly giving. 1912, they added this. They needed laymen to be pious in their worship of God, loyal to the local church and their pastor, adopting scriptural tithing, and conducting the Lord's work. Now, this is interesting, Tim, in a more business-like manner. They wanted the businessmen come into the church and organize businesses. I'm not a business, but a business-like manner within the church. So while mission studies were going on and mission pledges, and they were having mission rallies, by the time of 1915 comes along, there was more men involved. There was more learning involved, that they were not just meeting once a month, but regularly. And then the business of the men coming into the church brought in things like the unified church budget. Offering envelopes came about in 1915, and we use those today in our church work. And there were more campaigns about encouraging men to get involved through various ways, and there was more inspiration. So as a result of this, the Brotherhood really began to take off by 1915. It was moving, growing in the local church. And then I'll go ahead and change the next slide, because what we had was, in 1915, the Home and Foreign Mission Boards had created an indebtedness of $120,000. Now, today, that doesn't sound like much, but that was probably at least $1 million in 1915. Okay, so they were indebted, and it created a panic in the SBC, because they didn't know if they were ever going to get out of this debt of $120,000. So what happened was, and if you want to go ahead and change the next slide, the SBC, with the help of J.T. Henderson, came up with what was called emergency men in 1915. Emergency men, first of all, was not enlisted specifically for men as yet, but it was a pledge by men to give to the Home and Foreign Mission Boards, when they called upon them to do so, $5, and it would be once a year. Again, that doesn't sound like a whole lot. Okay, it really doesn't. And I'm moving quickly through here, because as a result of this appeal, something began to happen in the history, because they needed this special funding, but it suddenly became criticized, because, and I want to give you this little quote here from the Religious Herald of Virginia in 1915. This is what they said, and it became part of some of the reporting in the SBC, as there seemed to be interest in this, but some pushback. Here's the pushback from the Religious Herald. The laymen were organized primarily to stimulate missionary interest through existing organizations in the churches and denomination, but not to raise money in independent ways. What was happening was, with these emergency men, they weren't giving through the church. They were giving directly to the Home and Foreign Mission Boards as a designated offering, based upon when the boards requested that assistance. And some of the pastors said, whoa, slow down. We're moving against what we had thought we were putting together in the layman's missionary movement. Now, the SBC Executive Committee decided they needed to address this, because they felt like that this was gaining momentum and there wasn't going to be any men who wanted to participate in this. So this was, they came up, the executive committee came up with seven. I'm only going to mention four of the seven. But here is the executive committee's response in this discussion / debate as whether men ought to give designatedly directly to the boards. Number one is they said that we don't have, like the Northern Baptist, a Rockefeller who could just cut a check for $50,000. He's kind of a businessman that's very wealthy. Southern Baptist laymen are average. They don't have these large, huge businesses. He wasn't a multimillionaire. So we don't have that. So we have to depend upon our men to step up and give this $5 when they can. Secondly, the debt was a source of depression, division, and it was causing problems because people were not going to give to an institution that was in debt. It was like it was repelling people because they didn't know if their money was going to go to the mission field or towards their indebtedness. I hope that makes sense because that was their rationale. Number three, they recognized, and again, remember, this is 1915. This was before women had the vote and women were not involved as much in the businesses. There were a few, but not many. So what the rationale was, and I don't know how these pastors felt about this, but what they were saying in essence is women and pastors have the will, but they don't have the resources. The laymen have the resources to make this indebtedness go away. So we must work with them in getting it done. The last thing, and you've heard this before on many mission boards, whether it's home or foreign, and that is that they had at least 73 people who were called and consecrated to missions. But because of this indebtedness, guess what? They couldn't assign them. They put them on a waiting list. We've heard that before, haven't we?
Oh yeah.
You know, where they say that, well, if we don't raise our offerings or our commitments, we're not going to be able to put people on the field. So the situation I got from this was that there was a lot of talk about it. They still went forward with it. But Tim, this was one of the first things that eventually they failed at. And I hate to use the word failure, but it didn't happen. The emergency men had a good interest, that had a good start, but eventually it also didn't happen. Now, something else was going on that people may not remember because they didn't live back then, but what was going on in 1915 wasn't so much affecting us, but it was affecting foreign missions.
Oh yeah.
It was World War One. Yeah, it was going on. And so this was a worldwide situation. It was affecting the foreign field, and ultimately it would affect the United States. And so for the first time in American history, we had savings bonds, war bonds to help pay for the war. Now you got laymen who are pulled between giving to their church and being patriotic. And so what do we have? I call it, and you may have another comment or word for it, but you have giving fatigue. Men are just stretched to the limit. You know, how much can you give to these things? So the emergency men, and I only bring this up because it was an effort to try to do something for the cause of missions, but it didn't work out like they had hoped. Now, let me refer something, just keep it there, but I'm going to switch very quickly because, like I said, by 1915, there were more men involved, more organizations in the church. There was a growing need for more resources, more, which the men were clamoring for. Men were getting involved. And so as a result of this, we have now what's called the organizing versus organization. So that would be the next slide if we want to look at that one quickly. And
I just took it off because I thought people were getting bored about looking at the slides. So
exactly. Well, this one I want to we'll get off emergency men and we'll go to this one. Okay.
All right.
So remember the core value of that they were not to be an organization. They were to be organized, but not an organization. Well, the growth of the layman's missionary movement and all this got to the point where they had to be an organization. So what you have, which is the next slide, state and associational unions were being formed. And this was the forerunner to the Brotherhood organization of the infrastructure that became state and associational brotherhoods. They called them unions, and they were state within the states and the associations. organization was coming into play at this time because of the growth of the Brotherhood. And so these things were beginning to develop. And so they, as a result of this, you have groups that in 1921, you have the, I believe it's an Alabama group that mentions brotherhood for the first time. They use that. They use the word union and brotherhood at the same time. These organizations now had to be in a position where they weren't just meeting, but they had to be doing things in order to help men in their appetite. So let's go to the next one, because this is kind of a sayings of mine that I use, that organizations have to be hitched to something as well as hatched. It's not just that you have to have an idea, but you've got to put this idea to work. It's got to be hitched to something so it'll move forward and get going, or it just becomes an ideological thing that happens. So with that said, go to the next slide, because what we're looking at is organizational development. But this is a typical organizational development. I don't have to go through all these pieces, but every organization has to have these things in place, and they've got to be functioning, particularly if you're going to have goals and aims and purpose. You've got to understand that. You got to know your audience. Where's your funding coming from? Who's the staff? Who's going to be either volunteer or paid to do these? What are your resources? How are you going to get things calendared? What's your action plan? And then what is your reporting? This is what started to create the organization called the Baptist Brotherhood of the South, and ultimately the Brotherhood Commission, because it was moving in this direction where it could be organized. The good news is this got even more men involved, and it actually put more full-time men in the position, even though some of them were volunteered. It wasn't until much later, in the late 40s, early 50s, that you began to actually have paid staff that came into play. Go to the next one. I want to put this in plain terms, and I kind of put it down here because I wasn't sure where the picture was going to show up between the two of us. So in plain terms, I broke this down into two parts. What are you trying to accomplish in any organization? You got to answer these questions. What's being accomplished? What are you trying to do? And then what are the ingredients? You know, whether you're building a house or you're baking a cake, you got to know the ingredients, and you got to figure out what's the right ingredients in order for this to be workable. Who does what? You can't have too many chefs in the kitchen because they step all over each other. And if everybody just brings a hammer to building a house, that isn't going to work either. So everybody has to know their responsibility, what they need to do, and how they need to get it done. Then of course, obviously, the thing is, what's it going to cost? And we'll talk about that in future podcasts, where we found the Brotherhood Commission kind of overextended its budget a few times because we were hoping the cost would be covered. And just like the Home and Foreign Mission Board back in the teens, overextended themselves. And so that had to be recovered, which takes away from moving forward. The other slide is this. What are the obstacles? What are you facing when you're trying to build a house or baking a cake? There's always going to be obstacles in the way. Can you anticipate those? And if you can, are you able to deal with them as they come up, or if you're surprised by them, can you quickly fix them so that you can continue to move on, or do you become stuck? What are the tools needed to blend the ingredients together to build a house or bake a cake? How do you do that? And it's got to be done carefully, or you could end up with bad on both ends of that. A terrible cake and a house that might fall down. Who benefits? Who's going to be the benefit? Is the person, and this is a part that Tim, you and I are going to talk about down the road. Who benefits from this? The person doing the project, or the project that has been given to the person? Hint, hint, spoiler alert, World Changers. Yep. World Changers did two things. One, it was to help people get their house in order, but it also affected the people who were building the house or repairing it. So that's why this is important here. And then the question is, should it be duplicated? Is this something worth repeating? Is it because now that we know how to do it better, we can do it better next time? Or can we do it over to help and affect more and more people? Okay, next slide. Here's how somebody would ask, well, was the Brotherhood successful? Okay, this is how I define success. Success must be seen as a journey and not a destination. Right now, we can say very quickly that there's no Brotherhood Commission. I think we could safely say that. Would you agree with me, Tim? There's no Brotherhood Commission.
In many ways, or Brotherhood work. I know there is in churches, but
right,
not on a denominational level.
Correct. And you've hit the nail on the head, because the journey right now is through the local church and a few associations to still maintain that identity. And for some churches, like I experienced in Illinois, some of them now had this church had a deacons meeting in Decatur, and they want to bring Brotherhood back. They want to have the meetings. They want to talk and pray and give to missions. They want to do that. So the journey continues, even though the infrastructure may not be as strong as it once was. So the question remains, go to the next slide. And I'm going to do this. Was the movement's beginning successful? And so what I want to do is I want to share with you the comment that I found on this. Okay. And this came from Archie Brown. And that is that there were the functions of any growing organization will change over a period of years. And the functions of the layman's missionary movement, which then became the Baptist Brotherhood of the South, not only changed, but were largely developed pretty heavily during this period. But as things changed, so did their methodology change. And at the close of this, the importance is that the men were getting better educated. They better understood what missions was all about. They knew how to fund that mission effort. They knew how to pray intelligently. And this was something new for laymen. They never had this in the life of a church before in Southern Baptist. So it means giving them the education and the activity for greater service. So was it profitable? Did it do a good job? The answer is, next slide. Yes, it was. And it continues to be so if churches are willing to say, how do we involve our men and boys in missions, whatever it's going to be called, whatever it's ending up being, what it need to be. So that's it. That's the presentation.
Isn't a movement technically defined as when you have a movement instead of a program?
Right.
A movement is designed to basically, I guess, awaken the spirit, awaken the mind, and move people in a certain direction. And if I know it turned into an organization, I know it turned into a program, but in some ways, there's no denying that Brotherhood accomplished that goal of the movement.
I think it was. And I think I would safely say, now some may argue with me, and your point of view is also welcome and considered. I think the movement has always been the underlying factor. But I think what happens is, what do? We get caught up in the details. We get caught up in the indebtedness or the hiring and the moving into diversity. But the movement, I think, has always been there, so that men's motivation to connect within the church and to connect to missions is a very powerful force. And I think it maintains. So you're right. So I think it was there.
And we both know, having been Southern Baptists all our lives, that the Southern Baptist Church, whether you like it or not, is based on a lot of programmatic activities. And now that there's not a program that is directed toward the church related to Brotherhood, there's a lot that's being lost that could be, it should be captured. And one of those areas is mission education.
Absolutely.
And I know that men don't necessarily embrace sitting down and studying missions, but in the way that Brotherhood Baptist men did its work, I mean, it was integrated into the activities of the program. Well, and of course, and then you go back to young children, young boys and young men, where it is more of an educational programming aspect of the church. It's just not being done today.
It isn't. And the way, I think, if I can characterize my understanding of Brotherhood work at the time, is that we were educating children towards them becoming productive in their youth and adulthood. But with youth and adults, we almost, or with men, say young men and men, we had to actually begin with a project, as I would say, whether it's construction, disaster relief, world changers, lay renewal, lay revivals, and work backwards to say, okay, here is a skill set, prison ministry, construction ministry, any of those things.
Yeah.
Now, I'm interested. So what do I do in order to attain that level of commitment and that level of expertise
Yeah.
that comes that way? And I think that's where a lot of men are going. We still want to do things. How do we get there?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this. It may just be me. I'm attending a small church now, and for the most part, Arkansas is made up of small churches.
Yes.
And I know you pastored a small church, and I don't know what kind of church you're in right now, but you don't hear the missionary call much anymore.
You
From
really
you,
don't. You're right.
you might hear it in a sermon occasionally, but you just don't hear it in the
Yep.
corridors and the just activities of the church. And perhaps that perhaps that's something that um, some churches do better than others, but I've been in a lot of churches, and I'm telling you, you just don't hear it much anymore. And
No.
so, where are these young men, these young women, uh, being called? Where are they being called out from? I mean, I know we still have young men and women that become missionaries, but I'm a little bit concerned about that. We kind of lost that aspect of Southern Baptist, which we're a mission people, a mission minded people, and that's our entire history, right?
Well, and unless you're connected individually to the web, and I know that's the big thing now, everything is off the web, and there is not a fellowship of a gathering, and I use the fellowship not just to eat, but to say, how do we discover what God is doing in my life, in your life, as we
Yeah,
pray together, as we study together. And again, it's you and I know it's not about memorizing missionary facts.
yeah.
That is not productive unless it leads them to
There's a
say,
purpose. Yeah,
yeah, I got to go there. I got to do something about
yeah,
that.
yeah,
And and so you're right. And the calling, I just know that when I was growing up, we had a altar call for missions. We
yeah.
actually used to do that along with,
Absolutely.
call
Well,
for
you
salvation.
had associations had M night, was
Oh
it? Is
yeah.
that what they called it?
Yeah,
And
mobilization night. Yes.
yeah, absolutely. And you do. I mean, churches. We've got to admit, churches. There's some churches that do have mission conferences, and they still do global impact celebrations. And
Right.
I guess on mission celebrations, mission celebrations still exist, Rob?
That's a good question. I haven't heard from it. And and we call that the old World Mission Conferences, schools of missions.
Yeah,
And I know it changed a little bit to this global mission impact, I think, or mission impact global, something like that. I'm sorry, I should remember that a little better.
yeah,
But I don't. I tell you what I'm going to do, and I'll make a commitment to this to answer that question, because I have a director of mission friend of mine who's in South District Association in Kentucky.
yeah.
He's pretty traditional, and I'm going to ask him, does he still have these kinds of missionary conferences where you bring in missionaries and talk to they
Hmm.
talk to the lay
Well,
people?
yeah, I know you and I both. I don't know if I can count the number of on
Oh,
mission celebrations, world mission
yes,
conferences that I was a part of, as well as global impact celebrations, which was,
yes,
the thing that Larry Reeser was doing
right,
over and out of Woodstock, I guess, at the
yeah,
time. But yeah, it's not so much, oh, these old guys, they're just old geezers talking about brotherhood. Well,
yeah, blowing the dust
yeah,
off of history.
yeah, but like I said, like you've been illustrating in these podcasts, there was a purpose, and I believe that God was behind that
Oh yeah,
purpose,
yeah,
and God blessed men mobilizing, and not that men don't mobilize today and don't pray for missions and don't go on
right.
mission. I mean, we got a group of men, and there's one woman I believe on a mission trip right now. And it does happen, but it's not organized, and it's not, for lack of a better word, I know it's a dirty word, it's not programmatic. And with Southern Baptists, if it's not programmed, it many times gets
Yeah.
lost.
Well, and I think I go back to this whole thing of why did I do all this? Because there's always crossroads.
Yeah,
And I know we have to look at that to say, do we in the case of the layman's movement, they kind of bent it a little bit so that they could try to work on this indebtedness
yeah,
that was apparently choking. It's easy for me to say, well, they shouldn't have done it and that wasn't their purpose, but we don't know how bad it was at the time, uh, that it was needing help and direction.
yeah,
And so I think anytime, Tim, you have an organization, you're faced with, where do we go, what do we do, and do we, because I think this is what the commission diversified so much. Not that everything they did was good.
Yeah.
But there could be an argument to say, did they do too much? I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah. Well, we both know, and we've discussed this offline, the convention is a lot of large organizations, including like the US government, that becomes such a large and complicated bureaucracy. And I think that's what we're seeing today, not only in our government, but in our denomination. And I know if you've tracked anything at all on the Southern Baptist Convention that was held in New Orleans recently, there were a lot of very serious questions that came up that were left unanswered, that were brought up by messengers.
Yes.
Because the bureaucracy just doesn't allow them the interaction with the agency heads and others to get the answers to their questions. And, hey, on the next edition of the podcast, perhaps we can go through the Brotherhood report that was given at the Southern Baptist Convention in New Orleans, huh?
Well, if we can find it,
it'll be brief. It'll be brief because there was none. There were none.
That's for another time.
I'd throw that in there.
I thank you, Tim, for that observation.
Yeah.
And you notice I didn't fall into that and say, wait, did I miss that? Because you probably, like you, we streamed it. You didn't go to New Orleans. I didn't, but I streamed it.
I did not. I think my best time is spent tracking it online, to be honest with you.
Well, you see it and you kind of see what's going on.
Yeah.
But I do think that, and I'll just leave you with this, and then if you need to cut me off or stop me, whatever.
We're good.
But I'm saying, and this would make for some good PowerPoint training, because it's not that I have to have everybody unified into one direction, because men can have the diversity of interests, skills. I mean, we're not all evangelists, but we got carpenters, we got bakers and cooks, we've got people who work with children, but we don't need it to be, and I want to be careful here because I don't want to confuse people. It's about unity, but not unification. And I mean by that, all of us doing one thing, that if you don't do that, you're not part of this group.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, again, that's another crossroad you've got to look at. Because what if somebody says, hey, I have an idea, and everybody goes, well, it doesn't fit anything we're doing. And so the guy's basically, tossed away or something.
Yeah.
When it might be a pretty good idea. But again, is it I don't know.
Well, I'm going to pop up the first slide that we showed tonight as we kind of finish this thing out. We have a couple of minutes left.
Okay.
Rob and I would really like to hear from those that are listening to the podcast. Is this full screen, Rob? I can't show.
Yeah. I mean,
okay.
There it is. There we go. Full screen.
Yeah. This is our contact information, and we have been contacted by several people related to this work. And here again, we're not looking for tens of thousands of views or anything. We're trying to get this information out there, possibly even for future generations. YouTube is a great platform for that. Once you put something on YouTube, it kind of lives forever. So, Rob, we may be long gone. Well, and there'll be some seminary student or something. Whatever happened to the Southern Baptist Convention? And then they say, whatever happened to this thing in the Southern Baptist Convention? Was called the Brotherhood.
Absolutely.
So,
I do invite people to push back or say, here's another perspective, or what about this? And because we have with laymen, we've got every conceivable point of view. Now we're not going to get into politics or, who did it right and who did it wrong, because most of that's in the back. Yeah. That's part of history, but don't, like, well, Rob, you should have done a better job.
Yeah. That's right.
And I probably should have. I admit I should have done a better job.
Well, we were blessed to be a part of a small part of some of this work. And I know that a boy from rural Missouri off of a dirt farm, I never thought that I would end up at the North American Mission Board or the Brotherhood Commission and all these different places. It's really in my mind, it's an act of God, that any of this happened. And we've got about a minute. What would you want to say, Rob? I just kind of wrap it up tonight.
Since you said that, and I think that's a great testimony, and you do testify how God works in people's lives. For me, I was that boy in 1960 who was the youngest in the group. and they voted for every position you could give an RA's, president, vice president, sergeant of arms, secretary, treasurer. And they got down to me and another guy, and we were campaigning for custodian, and I lost.
That's right. That's
so
right.
the counselor there at that time, because we met at his house on Thursday nights, because that was RA time, that said, Rob, we're going to put you in charge of the Ambassador Life magazine. Your job is to collect them and hand them out.
All right.
Because he wanted everybody to have a job.
All right.
That changed my life, because I got to read the magazine ahead of time. I got to see all this stuff.
Okay, and we got to go. It's going to cut us off.
Okay, well, anyway, y'all take care. We'll talk some more, and glad to have you all with us. Yeah.